so welcome everyone to the 7th training session for FBIS. We've been running these since the beginning of September, and I see many familiar faces in the room. Going to just share my screen. Okay. So just to remind us where we are in the terms of the SAS training, today we're going to be focusing on how you would export graphs and CSV files from the various dashboards. As always, Jeremy has provided a tutorial, pre-recorded tutorial on this workflow. And what we'll do is we'll jump into that shortly. Thereafter, you can either ask emails in the chat, or we'll have a question and answer session afterwards, and then we can work through various workflows. And if obviously, as always, if there are other questions that are not specifically related to this topic, we're very happy to address those and jump in as needed. So just before I kick off, were there any burning issues from previous sessions that anyone would like to ask or alert us to? Feel free. Otherwise, I think what I'll do is I will switch over to the video session, and we will, hopefully everyone is hearing me clearly. We can switch over to the video, which I will start in a minute.
Sound seems fine, Helen.
Excellent. Thanks, Jem. For those of you who are new to the scene, Jeremy and I co-host these sessions from the Freshwater Research Centre. I'm just wanting to quickly, stop my video while we do the presentations. Okay, so off we go. Type frantically in the chat, and hopefully we'll have some good discussion thereafter. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to session number 7 in the FBIS training series. In the last few sessions, we focused on the different kinds of dashboards for visualizing and exploring the different kinds of biodiversity data. And today we're going to be taking a deeper dive into how you can actually take that a step further and download information from the dashboards, whether it's graphs or more detailed data sets in the form of CSV files. So really just giving you the maximum power to access data through the FBIS platform. All right, so today we'll use a case study of the Rondegat River. It's a river system in the Western Cape where there's been quite a lot of conservation attention and scientific monitoring around freshwater fishes. So we'll use the search bar here to search for the river name. And just a reminder, in the search bar, you can search for site code or for a taxon or for a river name. And you can see the Rondegat River comes up, and that'll take us straight to the Rondegat in the Cederberg. And you can see here various different data points from the different monitoring efforts that have happened here. We can also then just take our lasso tool and maybe just hone in on a subset of these data by drawing around them and creating a polygon. We hit update search, then that gives us that data set for those sites. So we can see it's around about 1,500 records from about 21 sites, 117 taxa. So if we have a look at the sites overview, we can see that for these sites, there was actually a range of different kinds of data collected for fish, for invertebrates, and also for anurans. We can then drill down into the multi-site fish dashboard and visualize the data there. And we can see that this is quite an interesting set of sites because they were sampled as far back as 1967. So a really nice long timescale on this data set. And just a quick reminder of what these dashboards look like. For the multi-site dashboards, you can get you get a map of where your sites are, you get a quick summary of your filter history, and then you get some basic information about the records, a breakdown of some of the key attributes about the taxa recorded at that site, information on the most recent site visits, and then importantly, the occurrence data. And then on the right, we have most of the key data visualizations, quick summaries using pie charts by packaging the data according to some of the most important attributes: origin, endemism, conservation status, sampling method, and biotope breakdowns. And then the occurrences can be visualized over time. Packaged either just as occurrences themselves or separated out into the different taxa, different native versus non-native species, and different endemism and conservation categories. So the first thing I'm going to show you is just how to download a chart from this dashboard. And that might be of use if you're wanting to use this chart just as it is in a report, for example. So just a reminder that every time you see this little orange button with an arrow, that means you can download a picture of the graph, in this case of the table, in this case of the map. For the map, you may actually just want to zoom in before downloading it. So you can, for example, get a nice framing of where your sites are relative to the Clanwilliam Dam and Clanwilliam itself. All right, so if we wanted to download this, this chart of occurrence records over time, we would hit the little download button, and that brings up a little pop-up that asks you what is the purpose of your download. So you might be using it for a scientific article, for a report or a thesis. You might be using it in a proposal or a presentation, or no specific use, which is what I'm going to say today, because this is actually just a test. However, if you were using it for a report, in the notes section, you would enter the details about that report, which is really useful feedback for the FBIS platform as well. Then, once you've filled that out, you hit the download button, and that gives you back an SVG file of your chart. This is a nice high quality file that can then be exported as a PDF, or it can also just be saved as an image file on your desktop as well. All right. Back to our dashboard. The second thing I'd like to show you is how to download the raw data. So all of the raw occurrence records from your query, from these sites in the Rondegap River. And what we're going to do is scroll down to the bottom of the dashboard. And here at the bottom left, the occurrence data breakdown is shown in the occurrence data panel. So this shows you all the taxa that were recorded at these sites, and gives you a quick breakdown of the number of occurrences of each taxon, origin, endemism, and conservation status. But if we click download as a CSV file, we're going to get a spreadsheet with all of those data records and quite a wide range of different attributes that companion those data and really add a lot of value and insight into those data. And that can be viewed by clicking download as a CSV. All right, the same dialog pop-up comes up. And again, no specific use. This time we'll call it test 2. And once again, we'll hit download. Then you'll see a note comes up saying that your download request has been sent to our staff. So this is then verified by an FBIS staff member, and you will then receive an email with a link to download your CSV file as soon as it's ready. Now, this generally happens fairly quickly. It can take up to an hour or two, but generally you should receive that fairly quickly. All right. So Next, I'd like to show you what the CSV file actually looks like. So now that I've downloaded that, I'm just going to open that up. And share that with you. All right. So this is what the CSV file looks like. It's very similar to an Excel spreadsheet, and it can actually be exported to an Excel spreadsheet quite easily as well. But for now, I'll just show you the CSV file itself. And like I said, this is really the raw data associated with all of the occurrence records in this data query. So each row is a data record, and each data record has its own unique identifier, which is this number here in the gray column on the left. And this is an automatically generated code for each record once it's been added to the FBIS platform, and it's a really nice way to trace an individual record. All right, so in this case, I'm just going to walk you through the main types of columns that are available and the main types of data attributes that you can then use to do further analysis on the data. All right, so after the unique identifier for the record, each record has its own original river name and river name. Original river name would be the river name given by the author. So if there was nothing specified, then automatically FBIS generates the river name based on its river's layer. In this case, the Ronnegat rivier, as per the river's layer. But in other cases, like down here, you can see that in this, for these records, an original river name was specified as Ronnegat. All right, next to the site codes, once again, the original site code would be the name of the site given by the author, but then site code is an automatically generated unique code for each site once it's uploaded to the FBIS. If it's available, there's a site description column as well, which just helps you, I guess give some additional information where exactly the site is found. Then we have a column called refined geomorphological zone. Now we also have a column called geomorphological zone, but just because of the layout of the CSV, it's a little bit further along, so we'll see that just now. But the refined geomorphological zone is really a column that would be entered by the user if they don't agree with the auto-generated geomorphological zone that FBIS populates the data with based on the geomorphological zone layer on FBIS, which in our experience generally does a pretty good job. So usually this is not really needed. Then next up, we have the spatial coordinates for the record, sampling date for the record, and then the basic taxonomy right the way through from kingdom down to taxon. Taxonomic rank is the finest taxonomic resolution for that record. For most of these fish records, it's species, but in other cases, it might be subspecies or it might be family for a lot of the invertebrate data. And then we have some information about the sampling. And this is, I think, really useful information where it's available. We have sampling method. So sampling method, and then we have the effort and then the catch. So it's really the breakdown of the catch per unit effort of, in this case, fish records. So we can see that for a lot of these data, there are no there is no information on the sampling method and the effort, but there are a few records down here at the bottom that have, maybe I'll just zoom in on this a little bit here, and I can show you that we have, in the sampling method column, you can see the method was a FICNet. In the effort column, you can see that the effort was time. In other cases, it might be area or some other measure. And then we have sampling effort value. So you can see that in this case, it was FICNets that was set for 720 minutes. And then you can see the abundance measure of the catch. So in this case, 14 individuals of Ostroglanus scilli were caught in this FICNet that was set for 127 minutes. So really detailed catch per unit effort data available for the study, which is fantastic. But yeah. All right, moving on, there's some information about the biotope where the record was collected. So you'll see for these data that's not available, but it's often more common for invertebrate data. And just to quickly go back to the abundance value, you know, in a lot of cases, it's just a record of a taxon at a place. So that's why these cells are blank. And the actual abundance of a taxon at a site is only indicated when that data has actually been provided. So I'll just let you know that all of these top rows that are blank are actually data from GBIF. And for most cases in GBIF, there are no abundance information. That's more data that have been uploaded from, for example, scientific publications or other data sets or reports to FBIS. Right. Then some more attributes about the taxon itself, whether it's native or non-native, what its endemism status is, what its conservation status is, both globally and nationally, and then onto some information about the source reference for the records. All right, so I've chosen this example specifically because I wanted to show you two different kinds of source references. So for the top rows here, you can see that these are all actually data that that the source is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF, data that are pulled into the FBIS platform automatically from the GBIF platform. And for these GBIF data, there's a certain set of attributes that come down with those data. Importantly, we can see there's the collector, owner, and the institute of the collector and the owner as well. We know that this reference category is a database, and that's the title of the database. And we also have some important information about these records coming straight from GBIF. Importantly, the GBIF ID, the kind of record, whether it's a preserved specimen, for example, and then some other information about the institution, the catalog number for the record, and who it was recorded by as well. Then, if we look lower down here at these records down here, these were actually collected. These are not GBIF data. These are data collected by Jody Reisenberg, a student at the University of Cape Town, and there's some basic information about the authors of the study, the year of the study, and the source in this case is not GBIF, but it's an MSc thesis. The reference category is a published report, not a database. And then there's the title of that thesis of Jody's and a link to it as well. All these other GBIF attributes are obviously not relevant for the thesis, so those are all left blank. All right, so that really covers the source referencing. Then next up is a really important column, which is decision support tool. And this just indicates data that have been used, checked by experts and used previously in a decision support application. In this case, you can see that some of these data from GBIF were actually used in the 2022 DFFE screening tool. So it's a really nice way to track which data have already been verified and used for that purpose. All right, then we have record type, which is a new column that we've just added, and we're still busy populating that, but that really just shows whether the record is what kind of a record is it? Is it a DNA sample? Is it a preserved specimen? Is it just an observational record? Which it's also really nice to know what category that is. Right, next up, we just have a whole range of environmental data or abiotic data or physicochemical data, depending on what you want to call them. But these are really the most common kinds of abiotic measurements that are collected alongside biological data when biological samples are collected. So we have things like water level and turbidity and embeddedness, and then a whole range of physicochemical factors, really quite comprehensive. And you can see that for most of these GBIF data, there are no abiotic companion data with those. But for Jody's thesis data down here, you can see that some of these cells are populated which indicates that there were indeed some abiotic data associated with her biological fish records as well. All right, next up, we have a lot of spatial and environmental attributes associated with the fish occurrence records. And I'm not going to go through all of these one by one, but more just to let you know that what these really are are columns that represent some of the key layers that are available in FBIS. For example, that this particular fish record was located within a particular river management unit, within a particular FIPA fish sanctuary, and within a particular system resilience category as well, and so on and so forth. Whether you're looking at thermal metrics, whether you're looking at catchment location, etc., that record will be basically has intersected with these other management and spatial and environmental layers on FBIS, including a wealth of thermal layers available on FBIS as well. So you can really get quite granular. For example, if you're interested in thermal information related to that data point, you can really take quite a deep dive into some of the monthly thermal information available for that for the site where that specific record was recorded. All right, everything through the management layers, like the water source area that the record was fallen within, the catchment that it occurred within, the hydrological region, several of the FIPA layers. Here we have the geomorphological zone, like I mentioned to you earlier. This is where the geomorphological zone of your record will be found, and more other management layers related to the present ecological state, critical biodiversity layers, some more thermal metrics, ecoregions, freshwater ecoregions, some more thermal metrics, and then finally just the GBIF key, which is a repeat column just right at the end for GBIF records, just in case. All right, so that's really an overview of that CSV file. And you can see that there are a lot of columns here, and don't be overwhelmed by that. What I would rather encourage you to do is to, once you download this CSV, you just know that you've got all of these associated columns to analyze with your biological data if you need them. And you can be quite selective in what you choose to include in further analyses by searching your spreadsheet for a particular column of interest. And just a final reminder that, once again, if you want to, you can export this file to a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet as well, if you prefer. All right, so that's it for tutorial 7. And the next tutorial, we're going to be focusing on adding a site to the FBIS platform. Thanks very much, and see you all next time.
Okay, excellent. Let me just go out of that and jump back into our meeting. Fantastic. Thanks, Jim. I think that gives us a good overview. Obviously, there's a CSV from the one he displayed, which was a multi-site fish dashboard. But as you know, there's CSVs associated with individual taxa, as well as SAS data, etc., etc. So as always, we'll open it up for any questions or comments in the chat. Feel free to ask your questions now. Thanks. Okay, no specific questions at this stage. Have any of you tried to work with CSV files? Have you had any issues? Has it been useful? Okay, definitely hush. Not as yet. Thanks, Mandy. Nice to get a response. So maybe just what I Jim, maybe you can just do the normal thing with the chat. If
Yeah, sure thing. I see we got a message from Casey, but I think it's more about adding sites. So
okay, yeah, we'll be doing the site adding next week. But some of what came up today in terms of geomorphological zones and original river names does kind of relate to that, but we'll unpack that a little bit more.
Helen,
yeah.
I think maybe it is worth just touching on Casey's point. I mean, I think it's nice for people to really understand how that works. I mean, he's asking, are basically if you create a site, if you add a site onto the map, you know, does that pull in environmental information for that location? And it might be useful to just give a bit of like bit of background to how geocontext works on FBIS, because it's quite a interesting tool.
Okay, for sure. Agreed. Okay, so let me just jump out of where I was on FBIS. So every single site on FBIS has what's called associated geocontext data. And this is a system developed by Cartosa, our IT developers, whereby they've written this system using various programming language, which relies on spatial layers. So a site is a single location in time. If I just click on that yellow dot there, what it does is in the background, it goes and grabs information on all of the layers that we have published to FBIS, including geomorphological zones, all of these ones that you see here that I'm scrolling through, that you can turn on and off. And when you download your CSV file, as Jeremy demonstrated today, all of this data, this is what we call geocontext data, which provides spatial data for a specific site, is actually returned. So we have a subset of that when we look at our side panel or overview dashboard, and then we get a slightly more detailed version when we look at our detailed dashboard. So in the overview panel, you can see all of this geocontext data. But many more of these geocontext columns are actually provided when you drill all the way down to this download as CSV, as you will realize by the tutorial today. So some of that, for example, that Jeremy spoke to was stuff related to these hydrological flow regime and hydrological regions, which are work done by Nick Rivers-Moore and co around flow classification, and in the terms of the thermal work done by Nick and I on the thermal framework. And this is sort of model data which provides some sort of thermal boundaries for the data. But as I say, everything that comes down in a CSV that's called geocontext relates to these layers, and information about that can be gleaned by opening up these I buttons on the various layer columns or layers. Hopefully that helps, Casey. But yeah, good to just unpack that a little bit more. Any more questions?
Helen, we've just got a question in the chat from Mandy, and she asks if we could just clarify clarify, please, that if we want to download a CSV, will this come through to you as a request, and will you receive a link to the file?
Okay, sure, Mandy. So we actioned what we call a download request sort of notification, purely so that we, as the FBIS administrators, could see who was using FBIS and what data they were interested in. Initially, we didn't have this functionality, and it was actually our sister project in Rwanda where they wanted to see what data their users were indeed downloading. So from the admin perspective, it just allows us to get a better sense of who's using the data and for what purposes. So for example, if I just open up, this is the back end, which normally unless you're a super user, you won't get to see. Sorry, I opened the wrong one. You would see here, we get to see this, a whole list of all who's downloaded data. So I see Hugo downloaded a CSV occurrence data recently, and we can see who's been playing around in FBIS. So the idea is to not create a stumbling block or a delay in you, the user, getting the data. But what it does allow us to do is to then keep a record of who is requesting data. So the process, if you were on a dashboard and you did download a CSV, and then you get that notice that pops up and says, you will receive an email. So you'll first get an email saying FBIS admin has been notified. And then normally there's a few of us that keep tabs on this. We'll get an email almost immediately. This is one I did this morning just to test. We'll get this request coming through from, in your case, Mandy Ace, and then we'll never reject it, because the idea is to not keep data from you, but we just want to know what data is being used. So we would almost immediately go approve. Once that approve is happened, you will immediately get an email to say your download request has been approved, and then you'll get the occurrence CSV file. I must just warn you, sometimes it goes into your spam. So if you have done a download and you're expecting a file, just double check your spam, and then make sure you whitelist the FBIS email so that it doesn't end up in your spam going forward. Mandy, hopefully that answers your question. So we don't want to be problematic by causing delays, but hopefully you understand that we also need to know who's using it and kind of for what purpose.
Cool. Helen, Mandy says that did answer her question. And yeah, just to add on to what Helen was saying, sometimes these data downloads are quite big data sets. It could go into the tens or even hundreds of thousands of data points, depending on how big the query is. And just to bear in mind that if it's a big data set, it'll take a few hours for you to receive your download link, and for you to be able to access that CSV folder. It's just because FBIS is pulling in all the associated information from different places, and that just takes time.
Good point, Jim. Yeah, and in fact, if you were to say, and I've tried it, all the invertebrate data for South Africa, it won't work. It's just too large a data set. You can imagine it's 300,000 records. So at this stage, we are trying to get a workaround for that, but at this time, it just creates like over 20 gigs of data in the back end, and it kind of bombs the system. So always good to use your spatial filters for selecting, subsets of data, which is generally what one would do anyway. Cool. Any more questions? don't know if anyone wants me to go through any more download demonstrations.
Helen, maybe it would be nice to show a SAS download, because it's a bit different.
Okay, yeah, can do. I thought also maybe a taxon download.
Oh yeah, sure. Either of those I think would be useful to see.
Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my screen. So I did do a download request for a specific taxon earlier. So I'm going to just bring it up so that because there's obviously I don't want a delay for us getting to see stuff. So obviously this is the back end. So I think this was the one I did today. So let's just see what it looks like. Hopefully I've picked the right one. Okay, so when it comes, oh no, hang on, I think that's the same one. Or was a multi-site? Okay, let me just go through the workflow. Okay, so we're on our map and I'll choose one that hasn't got too many records. Let's go to fish. And I'm going to choose a species that has perhaps not too many occurrences so that it's quick to download. So, okay, so let's go to this species. It's got only 2 site visits. So remember, I'm going to taxa. And if I scroll down on the right-hand side and I open the dashboard, it'll open up the species dashboard for this particular fish species. And then in this instance, I would click this download as CSV to get my data. It tells you there's an email that's been sent. I then just flip over to my emails and quickly see, you'll get a notification that comes through, hopefully fairly quickly. Anyway, it'll come through here. What I'm going to do is just to go into the admin panel to then see when that comes through. Download requests. That's the problem with doing it live. It takes a bit of time. Okay, while we're waiting for that, I'm going to show you a SAS one, and then hopefully we'll be able to open up the taxon one and then the SAS one. So I'm going back to my map, and I'm going to just open up a file on the Easter River. Let's just get, actually, let's get the Yonkasuk one. If we go to the site, that opens up a single site and navigate down to the SAS dashboard. In fact, what I think I'm going to do, because it's going to take too much time, I'm actually going to hop on to what I did for last week's session. Where I actually created some CSV files. So when you're on the SAS dashboard, you've got a few places where you can download data. Okay. The first is when you want to download summary data. Now, what that means is you're downloading the metric data, so the scores, okay? And just pretend I would click on that, download a CSV, but I'm actually going to open up something I've already got. So I'm going to download the summary data, and if I open up that file, this is what you would get for the summary SAS data. The computer's a bit slow today. Sorry, let me just close up the fish one. Okay, so this is the summary SAS data that I've downloaded. If I just open up the columns, you'll get your filter history. So you can see what it was that you requested. But then the code, the original river name, as Jeremy mentioned, the original site code, the description, the river name as per the 1 in 500,000 river coverage, the geomorphological zone as in downloaded from the digital terrain model, and then the refined one that the user has given, latitude, longitude, sampling date, and then these are the bits that are kind of useful for us. So you get with that summary data, let me just make it a bit bigger, you get information on whether the person who did the SAS assessment was accredited or not, the SAS version, and then your metrics, your SAS score, your number of taxa, your ASBT, as well as the ecological category for that particular date. And then you've got the normal details on the reference category, the study reference, the owner in this case, some of it was mine and some various other people, and then all that additional geo-context data that we spoke about previously that gets brought down for that. What you also get for SAS is the biotope ratings as for each of the biotopes, and that's it. Okay, so that would be your, if I go back to the graph, what you would get when you download summary data. So you don't get any taxa, you just get your scores and your ecological category and details about the accreditation and who did the assessment and what have you. The next thing you can do is to download the latest SAS data for a site. So you would only get the data for this particular site, the 24th of the 8th, 2022. Not sure whether I did that. Okay, so that's this one, which let me open that. Computer's in sleep mode, I think. Maybe I've just got too much open. So this is what you would get if you downloaded the SAS data for the site, just for the latest site. So you would get your list of taxa, the sensitivity weighting, the biotope, stones, veg, gravel, sand and mud, and then for the site. And you would get a list of taxa present, and then the summary metrics. Okay. The other thing that you might want to do is download all of the data for this site as a CSV. So let's again click through to my thing here. So this would be this one. And you would get all of the data. When it comes down, it's not sorted particularly nicely. We're still working on that, but you know, it's very easy just to select all your data and sort it by code and then date. But essentially here you've got the same filter history, etc. But if we scroll all the way to the right-hand side, you'll see now you're starting to get the actual SAS taxa. You still get the accreditation, the version, and the owner. This is very early data when we didn't split it up into biotopes, but if you go down to the more recent data, you'll see you get a whole long list of all the taxa recorded and the dates. And then it's actually quite easy to use this data in some sort of a pivot table. Yeah, so those are the three main downloads for SAS. And then this is what I mentioned, I think last week, but we're still working on it because it's not correct yet. We had a lot of liaisons with the DWS and other practitioners that do river ecostatus monitoring. So we're developing a spreadsheet that allows you to directly just copy and paste the data from the CSV into the REM model, the Mariah model. So this isn't quite 100% yet, but that would be the last download. And essentially you would get columns of the various taxa based on, let me just show you here. It's literally being worked on as we speak now. So I just provided a template, been working with it with Krista Tyrion, where we are hoping to provide you, the user, with the following. So ignore the top, that's just for the developers so they know what's needed. But essentially you would end up with sampling data, river, and then the full list of SAS taxa that could be recorded, but then with abundances between 1 and D. And this is literally then could be cut and pasted and put into the Mariah model. And then at the bottom, the metrics. So that's sort of still work in progress. Any questions around that before I dive into to see if we've got the taxon download? Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Okay, so let's see then if the taxon download has worked. I should have a notification by now. Yeah, no word. It's not coming through. Don't know why. Jem, have you got any taxon downloads available on your side that you can show us?
Helen, I can have a look. I actually haven't checked, but maybe while we're waiting for that, it's a slight sidetrack, but I think it's quite a nice question that's come up in the chat, which is on the CSV files, with all the ancillary data that are served, also including the physicochemical data. Mandy noted that there's actually the units aren't given on the CSV download, for example, embeddedness or whatever it may be. And she's just asking, are those available somewhere? And I'm actually not sure what the answer is there.
Yeah, so with the embeddedness, it's a category. So maybe what I should do is just open up the testing site and just show you what it looks like. So when you want to add data to a site, for those embeddedness, for example, it's a category based on the original reference condition manual thing that we wrote, or I wrote years ago. So it just opens up quickly. Just going to select any old site to put something on. So when you want to add data, let's say we want to add data, invertebrate data. Just going to close up some of my stuff because I think it's impacting the quality. So you'll see here, I'm just going to click, okay, we're preempting the week after session, but let's just say I'm just going to do this and we'll see the page where it's abiotic. And that's where we're going to get to. That's the point I want to make. So with the abiotic data or the physicochemical data, you get these five variables, sorry, where we've categorized them. And this comes from the reference condition manual that was written in the dark ages. But we only picked a subset that we thought were useful. So if the user actually specified a category in this, it will come through in the CSV file. But if they didn't specify a category, it will be blank. Okay, so there isn't a unit in the case of these five variables. But where there's actual physicochemical data, such as conductivity that's been measured, you can specify the value. And I've gone blank now. Does that show up in the CSV file?
No, that's what actually doesn't, Helen. So that's I guess that's the answer to Mandy's question is, the CSV files, like it's the names of those variables are all summarized, but to see the units, this is probably the best way. This is the best place to see that is on the form, I think, at this point.
Yeah, at this point, the kind of the general thing is to be able to know, well, conductivity is always millisiemens per meter. We did initially want the full name and the millisiemens per meter, but from a programming's perspective, it became a bit complex. But maybe we need to revisit that because it is really important for the user to be able to know if it's microsiemens per centimeter or millisiemens per meter, for example. But these are standard units which are available, and we don't change them. Once it's set, it's set. So these can be determined in the actual abiotic data form, which is going to be dealt with in, I think, the next session or the session after that. We'll take a note of it though and just see what can be done, because it is important. Maybe even an extra CSV file that comes down with the data that tells you what the units are for each variable. Okay, hopefully that helps, Mandy.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion, Helen, and another nice, with these tutorials, it's quite useful for us as well to pick up on things that we've overlooked. So I think that's a good example of something we can look at. Helen, we're not having any more questions coming through in the chat or with raising of hands, but Mandy did say thanks for that explanation on the CSV. So I think that was quite helpful.
Excellent. We just haven't found the taxon one. I'm perplexed why we're not getting a download request form. It wasn't a very big query, so did you manage to find a taxon one, Jem, anywhere?
No, I actually don't have one download at the moment.
Okay.
Helen, we've had are you happy to take another question?
Yes, sure.
Oh, okay, cool. Prasheen, thanks for another question. You're definitely one of our top question askers, so we appreciate that engagement. Really nice. And the question from Prasheen today is, what will the maximum lead time be for retrieving data? Is it just Helen and Jeremy that can release the CSV? Personally, I might wait a few days and the request again, which might bombard the administrator.
Yeah, so I mean, generally there's a few of us that dive into it, and we are looking at because now that we've got the extra functionality that asks you to provide the kind of the reason for the download. So you'll recall in sorry, just jumping back to this dashboard. So when you are on any dashboard, you'll know that if you ask for a download of a graph or a CSV, you'll get this pop-up request, which I'm going to show you now. So you'll get this immediately in your face request. Right now, we had the download request for the CSVs activated before we developed this functionality. Now that we have this functionality, which includes, in some instances, like CSVs for the abiotic data, we might indeed lose this delay because we still have this pop-up, okay, which says what you want it for. So in this case, I'm going to say training. But then we're hoping to lose this delay that happens, because we also know that sometimes, you might have to do some work on the weekend or late at night, and then there's no administrator to approve your request, and you've got a deadline, and it can just be very annoying. So what we're hoping to do is to just remove this delay by deactivating this request. Now that we've implemented, as I say, this functionality where we've included what are you needing it for. But what we need to just do in the meanwhile is get an email, change this to just saying you will receive a notification, you will receive your file by email. So we are mindful of not causing unnecessary delays to you, the community, but at the same time, we want to keep track of what's happening. So I think this probably will be rectified or be lost. We won't keep this delay. Download request has been sent to our staff. We'll try and fix it within the next month, but you'll get the, well, I'm rambling now, you'll get the email with your data, and the delay will purely be dependent then on how much data you've requested. The bigger the download request, the longer it will take, but it'll only be, normally less than 15 minutes if it's not a very big download, but if it's, a whole province, it may take a few hours. But we will try to remove this approval by staff, because in my opinion, now that we've got the other functionality, this is an unnecessary delay. So hopefully that answers your question. Thanks, Prasheen. Good. Any more questions?
That looks like probably it for today, Helen. And I think that brings us up on the hour. So maybe that's a good place to leave it. And we can, if people want to explore the CSV files over the next week, and any questions come up, just keep a note, and I'll be happy to discuss those next session.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks so much, Jim. And thanks everybody for joining us. So next week is the start of 3 sessions, which is all about how you go about adding data. Obviously, this is really important. And very importantly, I want to remind you again that when you want to go and add your own data to FBIS, it's very important to use this testing site to try it out so that you don't add fictitious data to the system. And the link to that is on our help menu. So if you go into help, you'll see here, it's all about the testing site, and you can click on the URL, it will take you there. And I just also want to just mention that as we do the tutorials, we also load it up onto the live site. So if you've missed out on any of the emails with the details, you can always pick them up here. So next week's session is going to be about adding a site. And I'm going to be coming to you live from Knysna because I'm actually on holiday for the week. So I'll hopefully have some internet connections, but we'll we'll do adding a site, and then the week after adding biodiversity data, and then we'll end off this year's session with adding SAS data. So yeah, great as always to have you with us, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for joining us.